At 95% context, your AI coding becomes nearly useless. But what if I told you that filling your context window to 100% isn't the real problem? In fact, recent research proves that developers who give AI more context actually get worse results. I'm about to show you why, and more importantly, how to fix it. And once you see this experiment, you'll never think of AI context the same again. Let's jump in. All right, just to make sure we're all on the same page on what context is. So when you have an AI agent, they each have their own context window, is what we call them. Your AI context is like working memory. So everything that you give an AI agent, it's like messages going in, and it fills up the context. So on screen, I've got what we will represent a context window. So when you generate a message, this could be your initial message, like you want to get a certain function. This will take up a certain percentage of the context. You'll then get a response back from the agent, and pretty much that response would be, an answer to your first question. But the problem with that is that actually takes up additional context. And you'll send the next message and so on. You'll get more context for another response and filling up your context window quite quickly. On your AI coding tools, you'll see that's that that'll be that percentage marker showing you how much context you've used. But what happens when you get to the end? So you send another message, and you fill that last bit of context here, and the model wants to respond. So in Claude Code, what actually happens if you're getting to 95%, so at this point, before you send the message, it doesn't auto-compact. So it actually tries to summarize all the previous messages before it to make room. So you can think about it literally just grabs this, summarizes it, so it takes up less room. When you get to 95%, what Claude Code does, it pretty much does an auto-compact. So everything you see here, it literally just tries to summarize this down, so it takes less room. So your message can come up and it can respond back in context. The problem with the summarization part is some of the context is lost because it's not really kept. And this is kind of what a lot of people do. They kind of just throw their whole code base into the context engine, into the context of the model and hope to get better results. And there's a lot of issues with that. We're going to dive into that in this video with the research results so you can better understand how important it is to manage context and why it matters so much for AI tooling, especially for the research results that have come out. So when you're coding with Claude or ChatGPT, every message, every file, everything you share, instruction, all goes into this context window. And there is just a limit of how much you can take. So you think of it as RAM in your computer. You really just want to limit it as much as possible. Most developers think the problem is simple. More context equals better results, right? Well, you feed the AI your entire code base or your documentation, every edge case that you can think of. But here's where it gets weird. And we're going to go to the research to show that. One recent study called NoLima tested 12 of the most advanced AI models, and they wanted to see what actually happened when you gave AI models a longer and longer context. And the results are quite fascinating. So we can see here on screen, there's about 32,000 tokens that were used in this testing process. And this is a bit of an older study, but I think the results are still relevant to this day. So they actually only used about 24,000 of the 32. And they saw out of 11 of the 12 models, performance actually dropped below 50%. And we're seeing that on screen here. We're seeing all these models drop between below 50%. So we can even see with like GPT-4 here, it actually dropped from 98% accuracy just for 1K all the way down to 69.7, which is a 30% decrease in performance. And this is the key trend you will see with a lot of this research. But how is this even possible? You would think more information to the models would actually give it more information to actually get a better result and make it smarter. So what's actually happening here? Why is this happening? Why is performance degrading? And I'm actually going to jump to a different research paper that kind of goes into a bit more experimentation to try and understand this trend that we're just seeing on screen here. All right, the experiment I'm talking about is the needle in the haystack. So essentially what they're trying to do is they're trying to hide irrelevant, they want to put the relevant information in a large context. So the needle and the haystack being the huge context of information, and try see how well the LLM can find that haystack. And then what they're going to do in this experiment is they're going to put some irrelevant facts above and below the relevant information to see how well the LLM can actually grab what we only care about. That's essentially how the needle is. And then they have controlled ambiguity. So they have maybe functions that sound very similar, but it's not actually what they care about. And this is what the study kind of goes in. And what they discovered as well, all models have this U-shaped pattern. They pay attention to the stuff at the beginning and the end of your context. So anything in the middle kind of gets ignored. So just to go into more detail, this is what we're looking at, the needle in the haystack. And you can see here they're putting this ambiguity indicator here. And what they found is you can see when only one ambiguity indicator is, which is this yellow line, it wasn't too bad. It kind of could find it, but not as good as the blue one where there was no ambiguity. But when you put more around it, one at the top and bottom, which is the red line down here, you can see how much it degraded. And this is the interesting thing, is how context is actually read in an LLM. So whatever at the top or bottom is actually what is prioritized, not the middle. So you can think about it, if you skim through something, sometimes you only remember the front bit of the first bit of sentence and you don't always get the middle. And that's a crucial thing to note. This problem is actually called lost in the middle phenomenon, and AI literally just loses track of information buried in long context. So quite interesting. But here's where it really blew my mind. When they tested this with actual coding tasks, the results were even more dramatic. So the next study we're going to look at is called the repo exec study, that actually looked at real repository level code generation, and they gave AI models 3 different amounts of context: small, medium, and large. Here's the kicker. Medium performed worse than small context. We can actually see on screen that medium actually performed worse than small, and also worse than full context. So let's just dive into it. So this graph you're looking at screen is what actually returned back if there were empty functions. The higher the result, the worse it is in this case. And we can see medium being this opaque purple. We can see it had the worst results. It was returning the most empty functions depending on these models. And we can see the shorter the context, the less empty functions that were coming back. And this is very interesting because it gives you a bit of insight how you should think about this. So maybe if you give it just enough context where it should focus on, it doesn't try and get confused and gives you what you need. And medium, maybe you're giving it a bit too much, but not enough that it kind of gets lost and it's trying to figure out everything and it's just giving more empty functions. Where full is, it probably has everything it needs and it's giving you everything, but there's still empty functions because it's also still getting lost. And that's how a lot of this research from this paper you should really interpret. So why is medium and large doing worse than short context in this study? We can think of it this way. AI is actually getting confused between the irrelevant information and it's spending its attention budget on the noise instead of the signal. So I want you to think of your own experience. How many times have you given AI, your assistant, your whole file structure, your documentations, every requirement you can think of, and you got back generic, unhelpful code? So if more context makes things worse, what is the solution? Well, it actually turns out that some devs are actually doing this intuitively. So instead of like sending a small message like here I have on screen, and you ask the AI agent to get more context of the data, the whole repo, so it fills up the context like this, what you really want to think about is how do you actually break the steps down and only give it the information it needs. The easiest way to think of this is just think of this as like a 3-level layer cake. So we're going to start with the first layer. And that's pretty much like the initial context. So we want to think of this context as what is the problem that we're trying to solve. Is there a specific function, file, or feature we're really working on? Like, let's really hone that down as much as we can. And then the second part of this equation is actually, what is the project structure? What's the project context? So we want the agent to know, like, where's it storing the functions? What architectural designs does it need to know? What patterns are relevant for the specific task? So it's the problem. Then we got the project context. And then the last bit of this whole cake is, what is the domain expertise that it needs to know? What are the standards of conventions it needs to apply to the current work? And if you can think of it, every task you're working with AI in these three levels, and really just breaking those down so you're not giving too much irrelevant information, so we can keep it to that short context window to get better results, this is the best way about doing it. When I say problem here, don't go and include your whole Slack history, your GitHub issues, responses for all this. Really just pinpoint the problem as clear as possible so you cannot get confused and focus on that noise we were talking about earlier. And the project context really refine what point of the project it should care about. If you're working in a larger project base, it might not need to know other sections it's not going to work on. It should only focus on that particular part of the project. And then the domain expertise of how you want it to think and how to generate the code. So give it like some indication of how to approach the problem. Again, you must think of this as like a very pinpoint way of structuring the issue. And again, the first prompt that you make is the most important. We saw that earlier with the finding the needle problem. Any issue that happens afterwards, the result or accuracy is going to decrease. So we really want to make sure that our first message going in is as specialized and direct as possible, so we don't have to try guide it too much. So another thing we can actually take from all this research is how we can actually approach our AI tooling, mainly with agents / commands and so forth. So the way I like to think of it is, if we try to do a certain task, for example, we've got our problem statement at the bottom, we've got our project context and domain. But when it's executing, it probably needs to do a test. And that test probably is better suited to give to a different agent altogether. So we can actually have like a testing agent that has its own context. So we can actually pass the result. We can actually pass the result to the testing agent so we don't mess the context here. So this context is just always filled with what's ever working on here, the focus. So we could pass everything to the testing agent. So the testing agent could just test what it needs to, and we can kind of give the testing agent its own domain, project, context, and problem that needs to solve. And we kind of limiting the amount of context or noise that we're giving to our main tasks over here. It's all getting pushed to the testing agent. The testing agent is literally just passing back, hey, this is good or this is bad, focus on this. And we can do that. And maybe where we want to think of a / command is, say we're looking for a project context, we can probably add a / command that could do this for us. So we could do / command could be for both domain and project context. And the problem is something that we can insert. So you can go / whatever domain or expertise that you want with the project context and then describe the problem. And that would be a great use of a / command that we can start using in our workflows. So in this video, we talked about, what is context mainly for AI and AI agents, and why having more context isn't actually the best approach you want to take. And you really want to treat it a little bit like your RAM or a budget. Every token really counts. And this is a very important concept, especially if you're using AI tooling or building AI agents. You really need to know what's happening with your context to get the best result. I hope you found this video useful. That gives you a bit more insight on how to actually look at context in a different way and manage it, and how important it really is. I really like looking at data like this because it gives you a bit more of a concrete view instead of it looks good. And I'm very data focused generally, so I like having this as a restructured way of determining if this is the right way to progress or not. I don't like just saying blanket statements without actually doing my research or doing testing myself. And I'm applying these techniques in my own workflow, and I'm seeing better results. And you'll see a bit more of that with this channel, more and more result focused, based with return on investment and statistics to back it up, hopefully, as things progress. And if this video changed the way you think about AI context, please hit that subscribe button, because I'm really trying to build a channel here that I can dive into more AI development secrets that most developers miss and share it with all of you. And personally, if you got any comments or things you actually want to talk about, please post them down below. I want you to try these tips and tricks that we found from the research and let me know your thoughts down below. And if there's anything you want me to go into more detail in the next coming videos, but yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.